Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here for the first meeting of the Donald Trump Appreciation Society. Thank you. Actually, no, I'm going to explain. You haven't seen Tom Frank's latest column, so I'll explain that in my introduction. But first of all, I want to thank our co-sponsor who helps bring Tom Frank. This is the third time in the library to us. Rainy Day Books, our great local bookstore. And if you don't have any of Tom, you need to have all of Tom Frank's books. So they're for sale in the corner back in the that is the southeast corner of the library, and we'll have a book signing at the end of the talk and question and answer session, and we'll ask you to line up over there against that wall, the window where the window is, and Tom Frank will be on the stage to sign books after we do the question and answer session. So, we're going to have a brief welcome to you from the president of the Friends of the Library. The Friends of the Library are very important. It's very important for us to have friends. We need advocates in the community. We need help with our book sale, et cetera. They are an integral part of the library, and we hope you will consider signing up. And so I'd like to introduce for a brief welcome Madeline Walter, the president of the Friends of the Library.
Aren't you all awesome? Thank you so much. In addition to sponsoring the reception this evening, which I hope you enjoyed, a little munchy crunchy and a little beverage, the Friends have raised money this year for one particular project of the library, that's Books for Babies. We did that last fall. Last spring, the board committed to expanding the opportunity for book clubs to read current bestsellers. And how many of you love books? Oh, thank goodness, because we'd be in real trouble if you didn't. And so what we have done is that we have bought 10 copies of 8 different bestsellers, 4 nonfiction, 4 fiction, like if Nightingale, Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates, David McCullough and the Wright brothers. If you're in a book club and you haven't bought that book yet and you want to read it, get your book club to request these. And we're going to continue doing that because we think it's really fun for the book clubs to be able to read the current bestsellers. So if you become a friend of the library tonight, and I have some board members here with me, would you all stand and wave so everybody can see who you are? My team will be happy to take cash, checks, credit card. We even do PayPal, and you can join the Friends of the Library tonight and even help pick some of the books that we're going to supply for book clubs. So become a friend and join us in all the fun.
And the Friends help us with all of our programming, and we have fabulous programming. For those of you who are not on our mailing list, you can pick up in the hall, you can pick up our calendar. And I just want to mention a couple of upcoming programs before I introduce Tom Frank. We are doing, it's the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, and so we're doing a commemoration of that. We're the only site in the state of Missouri that's getting the first ever tour of the first folio, the first book, first printed book of Shakespeare's collected works from 1623. The Folger Shakespeare Library is sending it to us in June, and around that, which is an extraordinary thing, it'll be at the Central Library for the month of June. We're building some really great programming. The Heart of America Shakespeare Festival and the Metropolitan Ensemble Theater will be doing performances in the library. We have a great lecture series, including Peter Holland, the McMill Professor at Notre Dame, Tina Packer, the director of the Lenox Shakespeare Festival in the Berkshires, who's written Women of Will, and Eric Rasmussen, who's the leading authority on the first folio, plus films and lots of other fun stuff that will be going on. You can get our entire pamphlet of all those activities. Also coming up, 6 years ago we did a series. We started a series on the Civil War on the Western borders. Our part of the country was really the center of the origins of the Civil War, and we created a symposium here at the Plaza Library. KU and UMKC history departments were the leaders in that. It turned into a book, and we turned it into our website, Civil War on the Western Borders, which has won every major public history and digital history award in the United States. And building off that to create a regional encyclopedia of digital history, or digital encyclopedia of regional history, we are going to inaugurate on April 1st and 2nd, the end of next week, a symposium here at the Plaza Library that you're all invited to on Kansas City as the wide open town, the most open city in America during the 20s and 30s, the Pendergast era, the era of 18th and Vine, the era, we're called the most open city because of drugs, sex, and jazz, not rock and roll, jazz. And that symposium will be keynoted on April 1st here at the Plaza Library by the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian David Kennedy from Stanford, who is the greatest expert on the Great Depression and the 1930s. And so I hope you'll consider coming to that. And last but not least, it didn't make it into our calendar. There's a series of unfortunate events. David Von Dreely, who is Time's roving national editor, has written more Time magazine cover stories over the last 5 years than anyone else, is based here in Kansas City. He's a Kansas Citian. And we have signed him up, as many of you will know, to do a series of conversations with journalists at the level of Thomas Frank over the last couple of years. And we had him signed up to do a second incarnation with Mike Allen, who was one of the founders of Politico, the great online news site. And they had a coup d'etat at Politico on the night he was supposed to be here. So he had to be there with the bared knives and whatnot. And so he didn't show up. So then we signed up Carl Cannon to be his replacement. Carl, who's the real Clear Politics Washington correspondent. And he got trapped by the snowstorm in Washington. So finally, on the 29th, we are going to have Carl Cannon back with David Von Dreely at the Central Library. So I hope you'll look for that. So, I'm sorry, it's at the Plaza. Here, at the Plaza, sorry. I'm glad somebody's paying attention to our calendar.
March or April?
It's April. No, it's March. It's March 29th. March 29th. You should never let me drink before these start. Anyway, March 29th, Carl Cannon and David Von Dreely here at the Plaza Library. Thank you. Thank you for the help. I need it. Okay, so tonight, no one needs to help Thomas Frank. Kansas City native who's made good in the wider world. He started life as a college Republican at KU, and he's returned to his roots with his latest book, Listen Liberal, which is a serious consideration of the problems that liberals have with inequality. And as a conservative Republican, it's good news to me. And if you don't believe that, and going back to my earlier comment about Donald Trump, you should read his latest column, which is a defense of the Donald Trump voter. Really, online, go to his website, a defense of the Donald Trump voter who's been attacked by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times and the Huffington Post as being racist and stupid, and he says they're not stupid. And there is... I went to his website and I found this great quote, which I think is emblematic of the kind of thing that Thomas Frank has done as a commentator on American politics. And though I don't agree with a lot of his politics, a lot of his views on specific issues, I think as a cultural critic, he's one of the most incisive that we have. And he has this great, and this is aimed at Republicans, but I think also in Listen Liberal, there is similar commentary on the left and on the Democratic Party in particular. And it's really about our culture, not about a specific ideological position, but about our culture. And he says this, the backlash in American politics is a theory of how the political world works, but it also provides a ready-made identity in which the glamour of authenticity combined with the narcissism of victimhood is available to almost anyone. And I love that phrase, the narcissism of victimhood, because it kind of defines politics on both the left and the right, I think, in America today. We're all searching for what we can resent in American politics. That's true on both the left and the right. And it ends up where we've ended up in my party, the Republican Party, the lowest moment in the history of the Republican Party. And it has to do with the fact that we all know what we're against. We're against each other an awful lot. We all know what we resent in American politics, and it's hard to be for anything. Anyway, I think that's a brilliant aperçu of Thomas Frank. And as you know, What's the Matter with Kansas has become a classic on the left, a classic of American politics, and we're honored tonight, the third visit to the Kansas City Public Library of its author, Thomas Frank.
Howdy, folks. So here I am. It's 4 years, and I'm back. Every 4 years, I come back and I do a book event in Kansas City. It was, I guess, 8 years ago now. It was 2008, so I had a friend who edits a newspaper in Paris, France, and he came over here. He flew into KCI, and we were going to drive out to the Democratic Convention in Denver, and I took him to Plaza 3, and we did all this stuff. And then we drove out to Denver, and we took the 2-lane highways and this sort of thing. And he said, he comes over every 4 years, like me writing these books every 4 years. He comes over here every 4 years to go to our conventions and see how America is doing. He speaks very good English, and he interviews people wherever we go. And he says, I come over here every 4 years, and every 4 years it's a little bit worse. And he was right about that. I want to tell you an anecdote before I start about where the title came from. Now listen, liberal. It's supposed to have an exclamation point after it. And it came from, one of the sources of it. I was in Wichita some years ago, and I was staying in a hotel there, and I was supposed to do an interview with a newspaper reporter or something. And in the morning, and he showed up at my hotel and rang the phone in my room, and I picked it up, and he said, "Rise and shine, liberal." I always liked that. Anyhow. So you guys know I've written, I write these books about politics now, and I think this is probably the last one. I'm just so, I've had it with this subject, but for the last 16 years, I've written all these books about conservatism. I wrote 3 of them, 3 books about conservatism. And the one that's probably most familiar to you, the one about Kansas, the sort of theme of the book was the many ways in which the Republican Party roped in working class voters, all the varieties of fake populism that they're so skilled at inventing. And today, as we watch the rise of Donald Trump, the man who may be the greatest fake populist of all time, right? Seriously, this is, it's Huey Long without the compassion, sort of. But as we watch the rise of Trump, I want to talk about something that I hinted at in my book about Kansas, but that I didn't go into detail at the time. And it's just this, that a good helping of the blame for the right-wing backlash has to go to Democrats. I think that the degree to which the Republicans have won these voters over, the Trump voters, the white working class, the degree to which Republicans have won these people over is the same degree to which the Democrats have abandoned them. And so I think this is the year to ask, whatever happened to the party of the people? The party of the people, this is Jackson's term for the Democratic Party. That's who they were, going back to Thomas Jefferson. Now, I mean that question, whatever happened to the party of the people, I mean it in 2 ways. First of all, how did the Democrats come to abandon working people, middle class of this country? And in a related point, why have the Democrats failed, just completely failed on what I think is the greatest issue of our time? And what failure am I referring to? Well, President Obama himself has said, and I agree with him, that inequality is the defining challenge of our time. And you think about that statement for a second, and you realize that, it's very sweeping, but it's not anywhere near sweeping enough. Inequality, I don't really like the word inequality. I think it's a euphemism. I think it's it doesn't really get at the subject. I think inequality is shorthand for all the ways, all the things that have gone to make the lives of the rich so much more delicious year on year for the last 3 decades. And also at the same time for the things that have gone to make the lives of working people so wretched and so precarious. Right? Inequality is this word, inequality, this euphemism. Inequality is the ever-rising cost of healthcare and a college education. Inequality is the coronation of Wall Street and the slow blighting of wherever it is that you happen to live. You catch a glimpse of inequality every time you hear about somebody that had to declare bankruptcy because their kid got sick, or when you read about the lobbying industry that drives Washington, D.C., or the requirement these days, the weird political requirement that all of our candidates either be billionaires' favorites or billionaires themselves, Inequality is about the way speculators and even criminals get a helping hand from Uncle Sam while the Vietnam vet down the street from you loses his house. Inequality is the reason that some people find such significance, such meaning in the ceiling height of an entrance foyer or the hop content of a beer, while other people will never believe in anything again. Inequality, I think, is a euphemism for the Appalachification of our world. Now, I know it's the Republicans who bear primary responsibility for this modern plutocracy that we live in, right? They're the party that launched us way back when on our modern era of tax cutting and wage suppressing, and they're the ones that made, a religion of the free market, and they fought so ferociously to open our politics to the influence of money at every level. I know all this, but, I've written about it, right? For years, but just blaming the Republicans and turning the TV set back to MSNBC, folks, it's not good enough, okay? It's not good enough, just getting back to that old partisan war. Because the things I'm describing, when we talk about inequality and what's happening to us as a nation, that we are coming apart, this represents a failure of the Democratic Party as well, right? Think about the Democratic Party that was around when we were growing up. Harry Truman, right down the road here in Independence. Protecting the middle class society was their mission, right? They would have taken someone like Franklin Roosevelt take one look at the situation that we're in today and would have waded right into the fight, with relish. This would have been fun for them, right? Shared prosperity was this party's highest aim. Defending the middle class was this kind of sacred mission, and they never got tired of telling us about it. How they were defending the middle class, working people, all that. And it is true that, yes, to this day, Democrats are still the ones who always pledge to raise the minimum wage and the taxes of the rich. But when it comes to tackling the defining challenge of our time, many of our modern Democratic leaders falter. They acknowledge that inequality is rampant, that it's awful. They feel real bad about it. They cry big tears about it. But they can't find the imagination or the conviction to do what is necessary to reverse it. And instead, they offer us the same high-minded policy platitudes that they've been dishing out since the 1980s. They remind us, they say, hey man, there's nothing, look, it's really sad, but there's nothing anybody can do about technology. There's nothing anybody can do about globalization, right? And they promise us charter schools and job training, and they'll shovel out the student loans, all the student loans you want. But other than that, they got nothing. Let's look for a second at the issue of the Wall Street bailouts, which I still think are the Wall Street bailouts back in 2008 and 2009, which I still think are the great sort of historical inflection point of our time, the most significant issue of our young century, right? This is when everything might have changed, when the entire country could have changed course, but didn't. President Obama, remember, 2008, was elected in this massive wave of hope and enthusiasm. And then proceeded to continue the policies of the Bush administration, at least in regards to Wall Street, continue those policies essentially unchanged. No big banks got put into receivership. No bailouts got unwound. No elite bankers got prosecuted. Right? They prosecuted a lot of people who lied on their mortgage applications. They did that. FBI went after those people, but nobody at the top. Obama and his Democrats refused to change course when every sign was telling them to turn, when it would have been good policy to turn, when it would have been overwhelmingly popular to turn, when everybody in the country fully expected them to turn, including the Wall Street bankers themselves, and when it was fully within the president's power to take us in a different direction. What I'm saying here is that on this matter, there was no conflict between pragmatism and idealism. This is what Democrats are supposed to be voting on right now. Bernie represents idealism, Hillary represents pragmatism. Well, on this issue of the Wall Street bailouts, there was no conflict. The idealistic thing was also the practical thing, and the healthful thing, and the popular thing. It would have been good for the economy. Everybody wanted them to do it. And it was completely within their power, and they chose not to do it. Now, I know Democrats are the good guys, right? Or rather, the less bad guys. But it is not a coincidence that all the economic gains of this recovery that has been going on since 2009, all the economic gains of this recovery presided over by a Democratic president have gone to the already wealthy, the top 10%. And this is not, or I should say not only, because sinister Republicans are so diabolically clever and have thwarted the righteous liberal will. I know that Republicans are awful, and I know they're obstructionist, and I know they gerrymander, and I know they do every trick they can, right? Which politicians do. But what we've got here is a straight-up Democratic failure. Now, I use the word failure, but the right word for it is betrayal. And the history of this betrayal goes back a long way. When I was growing up here in Kansas City in the 70s and in the 80s, the Democratic Party used to be forever grappling with its identity, arguing over who they were and what they stood for. And this went on through the 70s, the 80s, up into the 1990s. You had all of these different factions in the Democratic Party. You had the new politics crowd that came out of the 60s. You had this bunch in D.C. that called themselves the neoliberals, and they were really into high tech, Silicon Valley, that kind of thing. And then you had another group called the New Democrats that were a collection of white Southern politicians. You had all these different factions fighting with one another, but they agreed on one thing, and that was that the Democrats had to turn away from the legacy of the New Deal with its, old-fashioned fixation on working-class people. They disagreed on everything else, but they agreed on that. The New Deal had to end. And the man who brought closure to that long-running Democratic Civil War was, of course, President Bill Clinton, who brought a new kind of Democratic administration to Washington. And rather than paying homage to the old policies of Franklin Roosevelt, Clinton did these singular favors for FDR's old enemies, for the banks, the radio networks, the power companies, the bosses, basically. He deregulated Wall Street. And it wasn't just one act, it was a whole series of things all through his presidency, deregulating Wall Street. He ensured that derivative securities would be traded without any kind of supervision, thus teeing up both Enron and the financial crisis of 2008. And of course, he basically put an end to the federal welfare system that had been around since 1935. We can talk about that later in the question time if you want. Now here's a fact about Clinton's presidency that I didn't know until I started doing the research for this book, and it was kind of shocking to learn that in 1997, Clinton arrived at a secret deal with Newt Gingrich. And we always think of Newt Gingrich as his diametrical opposite, right? That these guys are complete, at loggerheads, hate one another. False. In fact, in private, they got along really well. They were from very similar sort of social backgrounds. They're both Southerners, all this sort of thing. But he arrived at a secret deal in 1997 with Newt Gingrich to privatize Social Security, which was, of course, the greatest achievement of Franklin Roosevelt. And it was a done deal, right? Gingrich had the votes. He was Speaker of the House. Clinton would sign it. They came up with a whole plan for how they would, step by step, how it would unfold, how they would do it, who would start it, what would the next step would be, how they'd set up a fake commission to, sign off on it, and this kind of thing. And Clinton even took the first step. If you go back and look at his State of the Union address in 1998, he talks about how we've got to, I think he said we have to save Social Security first or something, which was his way of announcing that they were going to, privatize it. And do you know what happened the next day and completely stopped this? Monica Lewinsky. The scandal broke. That's right, exactly. And that was the end of that particular scheme. I think she's a hero. That's like, we should put her on a postage stamp, is what I think. Now, one thing you might remember about Bill Clinton, although so much of what he did in his time as president is forgotten because it's all blanked out by two things: the impeachment, the incredible fiasco, and then the good economic times. And so we can't really remember the sort of the nitty-gritty details of his presidency. But there's a funny thing: when he was running for president in 1992. He had this strategy as a candidate where he would go out of his way to insult or distance himself from some traditional Democratic constituency like labor or minorities, thus assuring the public that he was his own man. The most famous example was Jesse Jackson. Remember this? He set up a situation where he could basically insult Jesse Jackson to his face on TV. They called it the Sister Souljah moment. Do you remember this? Anyhow, the idea was, he proved that he was that he wasn't, that nobody had any control over him and he was his own man, and he thought he could treat elements of his party this way because remember the saying in those days, they have nowhere else to go. Right? What's Jesse Jackson and his followers going to do? Or become Republicans? Come on. And so this was the sort of genius of Clintonism, or that's what people thought back then. They thought this was genius. And what's funny is that when you study his presidency, you notice this campaign tactic becoming a full-blown philosophy of governance. This basically becomes his ideology, body slamming the people that just got you elected. And the great example here is the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. And you remember George Bush's dad, George Bush Sr., had negotiated the treaty with Canada and Mexico and couldn't get it through Congress. The Democrats were stopping it. And Bill Clinton did. He managed to get it through. He set up a war room and Rahm Emanuel was there, and and they got it through, right? And and everybody says, what a great thing. When he rammed that through Congress, though, think about it. He wasn't just insulting his friends in organized labor who opposed it so strongly. He wasn't just insulting these guys. He was conniving in their ruin. Okay? He was materially assisting in the diminishing of their economic power. He was doing his part to undermine his own party's greatest ally and to ensure that corporate management would always have the upper hand over workers when they tried to organize or complain or protest about anything, because once NAFTA is signed, management can always just threaten to move the plant to Mexico, right? And sometimes even follow through on it, as we all know. So in passing NAFTA, in getting NAFTA through Congress and signing it, Clinton made the problems of working people, a lot of whom had just voted for him, he made their problems materially worse. Now, NAFTA is a fascinating chapter in political history because it's as close to a straight-up class issue as you'll ever see in American politics, and it gives you a real good idea of who our modern Democrats care about and whom they mean to please, right? Professionals and the rich were very much in favor of NAFTA, and working people, union members, middle-class people were very much opposed to it. People with graduate degrees, for example, were very pleased to learn that 283 economists had signed a statement declaring that the treaty will be a net positive for the United States, both in terms of employment creation and overall economic growth. Of course, that's not what happened at all. The predictions of the people who opposed the treaty turned out to be far closer to what eventually came to pass than the rosy scenarios of those 283 economists and President Clinton himself. who was talking about, like, how many hundreds of thousands of jobs it would create. Anyhow, NAFTA, immensely destructive, but no matter. Bill Clinton's new Democratic allies regarded NAFTA as his finest moment. They would always say that his finest moment, this is a particularly brave act. There's a biography of Clinton that came out in 1996, written by the journalist Martin Walker. He was a British journalist, a good journalist, but he really liked Clinton. He admired Clinton. And he admitted in the book that Clinton had some failings here and there, but he said these were in the end balanced and even outweighed by his part in finally sinking the untenable old consensus of the New Deal and the crafting of a new one. So that's what his fans liked about Bill Clinton, that he killed the New Deal, that he set up a new consensus in this country. So this new consensus, let's talk about that. Here's the heroes of this new consensus. The same democratic thinkers that I described earlier fighting back and forth with one another all through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the people who kept advising the party to dump the New Deal and to dump the working class, these people had the answer. Who's the new coalition? Who's the heroes of this new consensus? What Democrats had to embrace, these thinkers would say, was the emerging post-industrial economy. And the people that the Democratic Party needed to identify with were the winners in this new order. Not the working class, not the middle class, the winners, the people at the top, the highly educated professionals who populated our innovative knowledge industries. What I mean by this is, professionals, lawyers, doctors, the math PhDs that write derivative securities, the biochemists that make prescription drugs. If you go back to the 1950s and look at the voting patterns, professionals were in the 1950s the most Republican group in America. This is the most Republican cohort. Today, or beginning in the 1990s, they are the most Democratic. They've completely switched from one side to the other. And that's who the Democrats are today. They are a party of the highly educated professional class. Now, they have other constituencies, to be sure. I live in Washington these days, or in the suburbs, and they talk about who's in their coalition. They talk about this all the time. They call it the coalition of the ascendant, and they mean minorities, women, and the young. But professionals are always the group that comes first. They're the ones whose technocratic outlook always prevails in the Democratic Party, and it's their tastes and their manners that are celebrated by liberal newspapers, artisanal everything, right? You know what I'm talking about. And it's their particular way of looking at the world that is always taken for granted by liberals as being, so objectively true. So what I'm saying is that professionals dominate liberalism in the Democratic Party in the same way that Ivy Leaguers dominate the Obama cabinet. And Democrats, by the way, this is all out in the open. This didn't require any real, difficult research to find all this out. They write about this all the time. They publish magazine articles. They write books about this stuff. And one of the things they've done over the years is they come up with these very flattering names for their new favorite group. They call these high-achieving professionals the wired workers who will inherit the future. They're supposed to be, this is my favorite one, a learning class. The learning class that truly gets the power of education. They're a creative class that naturally rebels against fakeness and conformity. They're an innovation class that just can't stop coming up with awesome new things. And of course, the leaders of the Democratic Party are drawn almost exclusively from the ranks of this same group. It's not a coincidence. I mean, look at the two most successful Democrats of recent years, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. They have these very similar life stories, and Hillary Clinton as well. But they have these very similar life stories where all of these guys were plucked from obscurity by prestigious universities. And look at Bill Clinton, right? So he grows up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and he goes off to Georgetown University. He becomes a Rhodes Scholar. He goes to Yale Law School, and the doors of the world sort of swing open for him. And the same with Barack Obama. He goes to Columbia, he goes to Harvard Law School, he's on the Harvard Law Review, and again, the same thing. The world opens up for him. And for these guys, the time that you spend at some really fancy university is what defines you as an individual. Look at their cabinet choices. Obama, in particular, it's all of them. These successful professionals whose worth is established by their achievement in college or graduate school. And Obama's cabinet, in particular, his inner circle is concentrated, very, very concentrated Ivy League graduates, usually both Ivy League undergrad and graduate school. The main exceptions are when they went to Oxford, in England. There's a whole bunch of them. So it is this shift, okay? So the shift that I'm talking about from the traditional working and middle class to professionals that I think, and this is the theory of the book, this is what explains so much of what is frustrating about our modern day Democratic Party. This is what explains, I think, this vexing problem of Obama and the Wall Street banks. I mean, why was it that the Obama team failed to do what needed, so clearly, so obviously needed to be done with these banks, what the public was crying out for them to do? Why did they fail? Why did they go out there and declare that Wall Street executives were going to be held to a different legal standard than other Americans, which they basically did? Why did they choose Wall Street over average people again and again and again? And we can talk about all the examples of this in the question time if you want. But there's an explanation for it. And my explanation is that because for the achievement-conscious people who filled the Obama administration, investment bankers, these Wall Street guys, these are not just friends. These were classmates. These were they themselves, right? The two groups are the same. They go through this revolving door, they go in and out. People go, back and forth into the administration, out of Citibank, whatever. There is no difference. Wall Street is filled with these people of subtle minds, sophisticated jargon, and extraordinary innovativeness. They're exactly the kind of creative individuals that Democratic Party theory tells us we have to honor and respect, right? They're making these financial instruments that are so admirably complex. Is Bill Black here today? Do I see him? I don't see him, so I'll tell you an anecdote. Okay. No, he would tell it if he was here, but he's not here. Back in the day, bank regulators used to, when they would, in the old days, when a bank regulator would see undue complexity, coming out of a bank, that's a red flag. There's something going on. That's fraud. Or it's not necessary, but it's an indicator that there's something going wrong. For our modern day Democrats in the Obama administration, it's the opposite. That all that financial complexity, what does that mean to them? It means sophistication, right? Somebody's got an advanced degree. It's like financial rocket science, as an Obama administration official once said. And he said this, by the way, when he was explaining why they weren't prosecuting these guys. Because it's financial rocket science. You can't do anything about that. And it's exactly the same for Big Pharma, right? They love Big Pharma, so innovative. You can't sign a treaty that will, import generic pharmaceuticals from India or somewhere. No. You have to protect this creative industry. And megadittos for Silicon Valley, right? This is an industry that in Democratic eyes can do no wrong, except for this recent business with Apple and the FBI. But they're going to get over that. That'll be gone, and they'll get back to normal in time for the election, right? I mean, Silicon Valley, these people are so lovable, so professional, so creative, that for these guys, basically, enforcement of our country's antitrust laws has essentially been suspended, right? As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton used to travel the globe talking about something she called internet freedom. And what she meant by that was that access to certain Silicon Valley servers was a basic human right. That was our foreign policy in the Obama years. So what does a party of the professional class look like? What does it believe in? Now, the most important item in their ideology, it's so important that they take it for granted. They wouldn't even, it's not even like visible, right? It's like air. But the most important item in the Democratic ideology is meritocracy. The idea, the conviction that the successful deserve their rewards and that the people up on top are up there because they're the best. And this is the first commandment of the professional class, meritocracy. But I'll tell you something about meritocracy. It's not a very good way of tackling the problem of inequality, right? I mean, this is not a doctrine for mitigating inequality. This is a doctrine for rationalizing inequality, right? Everybody gets what they deserve, and what they deserve is defined by how they did in school, right? So you got straight A's? Yeah, of course, you're going to be doing really well. That's awesome. You didn't finish high school? You should be picking up cans by the side of the road. That just makes perfect sense. What I'm getting at is this, okay? And this is the sort of core idea of the book. There is no solidarity in a meritocracy. It's the exact opposite idea. Professional class leaders show enormous deference for one another. The people at the top of the professions, that's almost the definition of professionalism. They show this extraordinary deference and respect to one another, but they feel very little sympathy for the less fortunate members of their own disciplines, right? When one of their colleagues at a big pharma, or something gets fired, they don't go out and protest or go on strike or something like that. And I'll tell you a story. So I am, of course, a member of the professional class. I got a PhD once. Back in the 90s, I went and got a PhD in history up in Chicago. And when my generation of historians and people that studied literature and all the other humanities, when we got out on the job market, we discovered a funny thing. There were no jobs anymore. It had the market for academic labor had been casualized, Uberized, if you will. And the only jobs out there was no more tenure track jobs, basically, or they were a very, very tiny number. The only jobs left were working as an adjunct. You know what this is? This is when you teach a class. I mean, just like a regular professor, you teach a class, you work hard, you grade the papers, you show up 3 days a week, you work hard, and you get like $1,500 a semester. So it's better than that now. That's what it was when I got a PhD. And I'll tell you something. The funny thing about all this is this was happening, and our elders in all of these disciplines that I just described didn't give a damn. You know why? Because there is no solidarity in a meritocracy. I mean, when that life doesn't, they look at you and they're like, well, you didn't make the grade. Well, too goddamn bad. That life doesn't shower its blessings on people who, don't get all A's is not a shock or an injustice. It's the way things are supposed to be in a meritocracy. So let's look at this from the happy point of view, okay? I'm a real downer these days, and I know it, and we'll talk about the hopeful side of this later, but okay, there's a happy side here, right? This is the story of Listen Liberal is a happy one. It's the gradual, think about it, it's the coming together of money and merit, of righteousness and success. This is the marriage of finance with political virtue. And virtue and righteousness are what being a liberal is all about these days. That's what we deal in. You know that, right? That's the commodity that's for sale. But in another sense, the transformation of the Democrats has been this is just a disaster. Think about it this way. Left parties all over the world were founded in order to advance the interests of working people. That's why they exist. But our left party here in America, one of our two monopoly parties, by the way, our left party has chosen over the last 30 years to turn its back on these people's concerns, on the concerns of working people, and make themselves instead into the tribune of the enlightened professional class, the creative class that makes these innovative things like derivative securities and smartphone apps. And the working people that the Democrats used to care about, they figured they had nowhere else to go, in the famous Clinton-era expression. Well, folks, they have found somewhere else to go. And by abandoning them, Democrats have made inevitable both the economic desolation of this country as well as a populist backlash against liberalism that has been building slowly for decades. And 10 years ago, I wrote about it in my home state of Kansas. But today, it is all over the country, right? The backlash is everywhere now, swarming up out of the deindustrialized zones and screaming these bizarre, Trumpian slogans. Now think about the choice that's going to leave us with this year. If everything goes like it appears to be going now, and our candidates are, we have the two candidates that it looks like we're going to have, think about where that leaves us, right? Angry, Trumpian intolerance on the one hand, and on the other, meritocracy forever, right? Folks, there has got to be a better choice. Thank you very much. Now, are we going to do questions? Is there? Oh, yes. They've set up microphones here. And I want to remind you also that I brought a pen this time so I can sign books after the event. And I even signed a bunch before the event because I was thinking ahead. PhD.
I have a statement to make. Would you make it about 2 sentences? The experts up here.
Oh, come on now. Stop that. The blowhard is up here.
Real quick, it's been said that the blurring of distinctions between the military and the police in enforcement is a sign of going back to third world status. Do you think the United States is in danger of becoming a third world country?
Well, I don't know. That's tough. The inequality is certainly growing, and that's how we used to define those kinds of countries. And we'd also say, I did an interview with Bernie Sanders back in 2014, and he said when he was in school, and this is going back to the 1940s or something, they would talk about countries in Latin America where the handful of rich families would pay for both parties. And this was supposed to be very shocking, in the 1940s. That was very startling to him as a schoolboy, and he remembers it very vividly. He remembers learning that. And he says, that's where we are today. But I don't want to be that pessimistic, We still are the biggest economy in the world, and we're, democracy is so deep in the American grain. I have to have some kind of hope that we're not going to go there. Yes, over here.
Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between global trade deals, advancing technology, and the economies in general? How are these stranded together, or how are these separate?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So the angle what I learned when I was writing Listen Liberal that really surprised me, and you, of course, I probably already figured this out long ago, and everyone actually knows it, but for some reason it was new to me when I learned that you can write a trade deal any way you want. And when the Clintons and everybody else talks about globalization as though God was doing it, right? The invisible hand is coming down from on high and dictating NAFTA to us, that just ain't so. God didn't write the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We know who wrote it. It's a bunch of lobbyists in a room in Washington, D.C., and they wrote it to benefit themselves, and they wrote it to screw other people. And you can write any treaty to benefit this group and screw that group. It's easy to do. The details are hard to work out. NAFTA is 2,000 pages long. It's got hundreds of tiny details in it. It's not it's not just globalization. It's not one word. It's extremely complicated. One of the things I learned, I'm sorry, I get off on these anecdotes, and I apologize. So there's a friend of mine who's an economist in D.C., and he was telling me he's, for years, proposed this idea that we could write a trade agreement where we imported, and this is going to make me real unpopular here, we imported like hundreds of thousands of very well-trained doctors and lawyers and brought down the price of medicine and legal services for Americans. Yeah, for average Americans, it would be really good for working-class people. And it would be, it would make doctors and lawyers like real unhappy. But you could do it. You could write a treaty that did this. You could write a treaty that brought in generic pharmaceuticals, high-quality generic pharmaceuticals from India. It would be real bad for big pharma, but it would be great for the rest of us. Like, $1,000 a pill. That would be a thing of the past. And a trade deal could do that. You could do it with a trade deal if you wanted. Now, my economist friend who's always proposing these things, people laugh at him in Washington. They're like, oh, that'll never happen. It's not even worth taking seriously, they think. But for me, what gets me is knowing that that's even possible. You know, I can never hear someone say, oh, it's just globalization. I can never hear that again without, like, you know, derisive chuckling, you know? And the same with technology. Like, oh, technology is doing that. Another thing I learned in writing this book, technology isn't this unmoved mover. Technology, like, okay, think about musicians. Musicians are a category of worker who have just been destroyed by the internet. You guys know about this? What's happened to, I used to have a lot of friends who are rock musicians, and they are just ruined, you know, ruined. Spotify, Pandora, all of these different services now, and they get pennies for when you listen to their music. And that's not because technology did that to them. That's because there was bad agreements, you know? So technology has to come through, you know, every economic relationship is a political relationship, is what I learned. And every one of these deals, you know, is subject to the laws of this country, and we make the laws of this country. You know, and if we don't want it to be that way, it's not that way. We can change it. We can make it different. Or in the musicians' case, their record labels could have negotiated a better deal for them. You know, they didn't. It's a long and complicated story, but it's once you understand this, something like Uber doesn't just, you know, come from on high. Uber has to deal with all these local laws and regulations, and it's up to our local governments to control them or to let them do whatever they want. You know, it's not just technology. So that's what I meant when I said I talk way too much, and I apologize for that, folks. Yes, sir.
Yes, I just have two questions. The first one is the true and false.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm good at these.
Okay. I've been told that the liberal establishment view the middle class as composed of a bunch of uncultured ignoramuses who inhabit America's archaic flyover country.
Is that my book?
No.
Well, you know, I don't want to be too hard on them, but yeah, okay.
Okay.
All right, now.
Okay.
I mean, there is a lot of contempt. We can talk about this later, but there's something is going to happen real soon, which is the Democrats are going to have to figure out how to get Trump's voters away from him. And a lot of my liberal friends are like, ew, why would we do that? Mm-hmm. Like, those people their votes are tainted, you know? And that's a weird, I mean, I can understand where they're coming from and why they think that, but what a strange response. But it's exactly what you're talking about there. Okay, next one.
My second question is...
Was I right, by the way?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm just trying to
keep going.
Get some accuracy on that.
Okay.
Okay. Now, my second question is, can you tell me if the Republican Party, let's see. Oh, yeah, here we go. You got me confused with that first question. Okay. Has the Republican Party sponsored to restrict anti-middle class reverse discrimination?
Oh, that I think, I mean, you're talking about like Supreme Court cases and stuff?
Well, has the Republican Party been instrumental in trying to get any legislation
Oh, sure.
passed?
Well, I don't know of anything right now, but I'm sure there is. It isn't what I researched this time. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But there's Supreme Court cases on this that come up all the time, but I haven't followed it in a long time. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Wanted to ask about the war on privacy and how people like Edward Snowden and other whistleblowers are targeted. I'm wondering why Democrats seem to hate transparency, even though the president has promoted having a transparent cabinet.
You're talking about Snowden?
Not necessarily so much Snowden, just the whole idea that the security state is monitoring everything, just the larger picture,
yeah.
not just Snowden.
By the way, isn't that fascinating? And what fascinates me is private sector spying, you know, which is something that we've only learned about since basically since Snowden, and it's shocking, and it really puts the you okay over there? Okay, it really puts the internet freedom thing that Hillary Clinton was pushing all those years. It really puts it in a new light. I mean, it's kind of frightening to think that they want everybody to everybody to be on the internet at all times. I'm trying to figure out ways to get away from it, you know. But I think I've lost that war. But can I just point out, I mean, a real simple irony here, which is if you go back to President Obama's, when he was running for president, he had a website called change.gov, and if you go to it, he has this whole thing about transparency, and he was going to, and whistleblowers, he was going to protect whistleblowers. That was actually one of his campaign promises, protect whistleblowers. And it's like precisely the opposite thing has happened. Is there, you know, I don't have a great explanation for it, but I do have a good anecdote, which is so when the Snowden case happened, and it was so shocking in Washington, D.C., you know, everybody thinks Snowden is a real scoundrel in Washington, D.C. One of the ways in which people denounced him, or one of the reasons people denounced him, one of the things they denounced him for was because he didn't finish high school. Isn't that, they're like, how can this guy that didn't finish high school do this to the smartest administration we've ever had? Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to make a quick encapsulation of what I think a lot of what you said. I hope it isn't too cute. It probably is, but then I have a question to ask. And it sort of seems you've said that the economic field is now splintered into the far-right plutocrats, which is the group of greed. And then on the other side, we have the rise of the brown people and maybe the revenge of the Bubbas. That's the party of need. And in the middle, seeming poised to modulate or moderate or rectify this, are the meritocracy, the sort of liberal, party of deeds, I'll call it.
Oh, that's a nice rhymes. I like that.
I'm saying they don't, and what I say is they don't seem to want stuff, but what they want is, power, or they want to look at themselves in the mirror.
Yes.
Maybe it's
Yeah, well, that's very important. That's very important.
This is my question. Isn't the thing that is needed to rectify the whole, the breach in the community of people, and maybe the breach of community with the planet, is empathy? And if you agree with that, don't you think empathy is most likely to rise from the meritocracy and their education? And if you agree with that, do you think it can happen?
Okay, so you've asked the wrong guy. Okay, so can I just say how I see it? I like your idea, but the way I see it, there's two different hierarchies in America. This is the sort of sociological perspective. There's a hierarchy of money, business. The 1%, right, with the Koch brothers at its peak, or whatever however you want to look at it. But and I've written about that ad infinitum, over the last 16 years or whatever. But there's this other hierarchy, and this is the hierarchy of status. And that's the hierarchy that the Democrats answer to. And what fascinates me about that hierarchy is, we talk about the top 1%, but in fact, the people who have done well in the recovery is the top 10%. And this tends to be, professionals. It's not just the Koch brothers, it's the top 10%. And a lot of that 10%, probably most of them, Democrats. And this is the mass constituency for inequality. Now, about empathy. Empathy is nice, and it's it's an important spiritual quality, but politics is a conflict of force. And what I want to see is, I want to see the working people of this country, win elections. I want to see them have labor unions. I want to see some power relationships. But of course, it all does come out of empathy. Yes, over here.
I hate to hear people using the word meritocracy in the way that they're using it. You don't deserve success if you steal it. So,
very good.
To me, it seems an inevitability that our present situation in politics, especially with the Democrats, in a capitalistic society, at some point it was going to have to come to money. Because it takes money to run a campaign, a lot of money to run a campaign.
Yes.
And if you are welfare rights organization, if you are any underclass or underserved population, you don't have the money to put somebody in politics. I think the Clintons realized this when they went to Hollywood to get their campaigns funded.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, I kind of don't see where you're going with saying that there's a difference now in politics being staffed by people who are highly degreed. I saw that in the Johnson administration. I
Yes.
saw that in the Reagan administration.
and yes.
I don't remember an administration where they didn't have people who were highly degreed. And even Obama, it looks as though to me that they used his blackness as sort of a codified way of saying he's middle class. But they just used him to push through Obamacare, which if Hillary had done it, probably would have cost her the nomination.
Okay, so those are really good questions, and you've raised about 3 of the most important issues. Let's see, which one should we do first? The one that I love to talk about is expertise in government. Because I'm a believer in expertise in government, you know? You should know what you're doing before they let you run the EPA, right? And there's a reason they don't let me fly the 747. You know, I believe in this. And but you mentioned the Johnson administration. So one of the sort of great inspirations for my book was a book called The Best and the Brightest. Do you guys remember this? I mean, I'm nowhere near that guy. He is a fantastic writer, but it's a study of the Vietnam War and how the sort of what's the word? The maladies of professionalism not caused the Vietnam War, but prolonged it for years and years and years. All these foreign policy experts who refused to listen to people outside their circle of expertise. I mean, it's a fascinating cautionary tale of how technocracy, which means, you know, rule by the capable, how technocracy goes wrong. And we see it again and again. I mean, it's just gotten worse since then. So as I'm writing this book and seeing, you know, examples of like Obama's administration, Larry Summers, the president of Harvard, is advising him on economic issues, you know, and Larry Summers, there's this famous statement that I don't know if it's that famous. There's a statement that he makes when they came in that they're the most. How did he put it? That they're the most social science oriented administration, taking over from the least social science oriented administration, or something like that, referring to the George W. Bush people. And you know, he's right. Bush was famous for like putting people like Brownie in charge of FEMA. Do you remember this? And I wrote a whole book about this, all the ways that the Bush filled his administration with cronies and hacks, and they couldn't do anything right. And then Obama comes in. By the way, this is one of the reasons I really liked Obama back in 2009. He's bringing in people that know what they're doing. I thought that was a reason for hope. And then everything goes wrong. And it's this meritocracy of failure. And so that was fascinating to me, and that's one of the themes in the book. How did that happen? You get all these brilliant people, and they screw up. And so I look back over the history of expertise in government, which, as I said, I really believe in. And there was a time when it worked. The Roosevelt administration, the Brain Trust. And this is very famous for working. They did all sorts of wonderful things. They took the economy apart and put it back together. They did amazing things. And they were highly intelligent people, all these intellectuals. So what's the difference between his administration and Obama's? Now, this is really interesting, okay? And we know Obama's is this very narrow, very narrowly defined expertise, all Ivy League grad school, a lot of Rhodes Scholars, that kind of thing. But mostly Harvard, okay? Including the guy that he just nominated for the Supreme Court, right? Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School, Harvard Law Review. But you go back and look at Roosevelt's administration, surrounded by brilliant people. But they all come from these weird places. Harry Hopkins, his right-hand man during World War II, a social worker from Iowa. Okay? Henry Wallace, his agriculture secretary and later vice president, who was one of the great agriculture secretaries, probably the greatest, went to Iowa State and published a magazine for farmers before coming into government. Who's the guy that he put in at the Federal Reserve? Come on. No, she's labor secretary. Yes, but I'm thinking of Mariner Eccles. Okay, Mariner Eccles, he put this guy in at the Federal Reserve, a great genius. He sort of invented Keynesianism without having read Keynes. He had his own homegrown version of it. Who was he? He was a small-town banker from Utah Or you look at the man that ran Roosevelt's bailout agency. And Roosevelt's bailout agency is a fantastic story. They went around, when they would bail out a bank, they'd be like, okay, well, we don't like any of your management. They're gone. Or we don't like the way you run your bank at all. We're putting you out of business. And and in some cases, they would start up a new bank if they felt like it. The guy who ran this agency was a banker a small town businessman from Texas. Okay, he had no sympathy for Wall Street banks, regarded that he was this populist, right? Wall Street was the enemy. Even Roosevelt's Ivy Leaguers, and he did have a contingent of them, very famously, a bunch of guys from Harvard and Yale. But think about who they were. John Kenneth Galbraith, right? Who spent his entire life going to war against economic orthodoxy. Or what's his name that ran the antitrust division of the Justice Department, was from Yale. He was a professor at Yale. Thurman Arnold was his name. He was a populist from Wyoming. And he had been a professor at Yale, but he also wrote a book called The Folklore of Capitalism, this really cruel, derisive 1930s style book. It's just like, you can't do that in Washington nowadays. But look at look at the contrast between this bunch, who are highly successful, and then Obama's bunch, who were the best. Their credentials are the best anybody has ever seen. They blow the SAT away. They're fantastically brilliant people. Fail. Okay? What's the explanation for this? And I thought about it. Orthodoxy. Okay? All of these I'm sorry, I'm going a little too long and I'm sending it, okay. But basically, long story short, when you choose the people at the very top of an academic discipline, you're getting orthodoxy. When you choose from all around the country, you're getting all sorts of different points of view. Okay, who's next? Over here.
Okay, you have really confused me.
Okay.
Because the meritocracy idea, I attribute to Republicans. It justifies who they are and why they stay at the top and why they don't want to share.
But you mean like the Ayn Rand? It's a sort of different, it's slightly different, but we'll get to that. You keep going.
So I felt like the Democrats are the ones that say no. Meritocracy is not it, because many of those people start out with all the advantages and other people don't.
No, that's
and
right.
That's the problem.
But meritocracy is that everybody has the right to rise. So everybody gets an application to Harvard. Everybody gets to fill out an application to Harvard. That's the Democratic view,
No.
Rich and poor.
No, but they're saying many of the other people can't even reach that level because they don't have the advantages that let them rise to that level.
Right. So then you help them out and that sort of thing, and you make sure the SAT test is fair. But it's a different hierarchy. One is the hierarchy of organized money, business. And the Ayn Rand, it's a very similar idea to the kind of Ayn Rand, the triumph of the powerful. But it's slightly different, where all your success and your virtue and your merit is defined by educational attainment, credentialing.
Well, that's not quite how I see it.
Okay.
I see it as giving people what they need to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But some of these people don't have any. The poor don't necessarily get.
Well, I wish it were that way.
But so are you saying that the Democrats abandoned these people and they went to the Republicans?
Well, what I'm saying is that the problem goes further than having opportunity to go to college. That there's lots of people, when you have the best kind of system, you're still going to have lots of people left behind. We've got to wind this thing up. Where's the person who's in charge? Don't we have a game? Isn't there a game that we're going to go watch? We're going to watch the basketball game or something. Okay, yeah, we'll do this. Yes. We'll stop the lines here. Okay.
So obviously, as a young person who will be voting for the first time, I find myself surrounded by my peers who are either just so angry that they're voting for Donald Trump or so angry that they're planning on voting for Bernie Sanders. So I'm just curious if you think that the rise of Bernie Sanders, in particular with the young population, is maybe indicative of an impending shift within the Democratic Party?
Yes, very much so.
Even if he loses the nomination, or if he loses, that movement will be stifled altogether.
I'm surprised that it took us so long to get to this question. Yes, I'm very hopeful about Bernie Sanders. Yay! And The reason I'm hopeful is because, well, I think he's a good guy and he's an admirable person, and I agree with his politics, but also because he's shown us that there is a chink in the armor of the financial of the way of financing candidates. That there is a way it can be done. You can have your. Did you bring that bourbon? Oh no, you're not the guy. You got it. You got it right there. Okay. That was true, by the way. Bernie is showing us that there's and yes, 4 years from now there'll be another Bernie, and 4 years from now there'll also be another Trump. Okay. And so, I mean, things are just going to get wild from here on out if we don't reverse what's happening to us economically. If we don't reverse the destruction of the middle class of this country, it's just going to get crazy. Yeah.
Sure, Thomas. I've been a Teamster for 40 years, and I've seen the labor movement really take some pretty good licks. And I know, like, when Obama, in 2008, Obama was talking about card check and making it easier to organize.
And you didn't get it, did you? Yeah.
No, we didn't. But what I saw the interview you did with Tom Hartman, and at the end of it, he asked you, okay, what do you think we should do about it? And I'd like for you to share that.
Yeah. Look, you mentioned card check. It would be, people are so frustrated in the workplace right now. People are so angry at what they're, like being an Uber driver or seeing every job Uberized. There's a company out there called TaskRabbit. Y'all familiar with this? You can hire people out to do odd jobs. I mean, we're basically becoming task rabbits. We are work pets, and people hate this. I mean, where's the millennial who is here? I mean, these kids are coming out of college with all of this mountain of student debt, and they're discovering what are the jobs that are out there. It's this all casualized labor. If you were to make it easier to form a union in this country, you would see union organizing sweep these things, like every Starbucks, and it would be. What would change inequality? That would change inequality. That would reverse the whole thing. But it is so frustrating. It must be very frustrating to you because the unions, they get behind the Democratic candidate, whoever it is, and they give them their money, and they go out and they work so hard, and then the Democrat gets elected, and it's like Barack Obama, and he says, thanks for all your help, thanks for all your votes. Here's your issue. Oops, I didn't lift a finger. Too bad. It was called card check. It was one of the first things that his administration was going to pass.
50+1, sign a card. You didn't have to have a.
It would have made it much easier to form a union in the workplace, and there, but he didn't do anything. He didn't try to get a compromise. He didn't try to get parts of it passed and leave behind other parts. He just let it go. Didn't do anything. And this is very typical because you have nowhere else to go. That is how they treat you. You are a captured constituency. And if I were you, it would make me like really angry. It does make me really angry. What am I saying? Yeah.
Just from a politics standpoint, I find the Republican leadership to be without shame and the Democratic leadership to be without courage.
Yeah, and that's right.
The Republicans are so good at pushing their issues, and you can make the case that they have to be, because on many issues that they push, they're not pushing the public or the popular viewpoint, whether it's the...
no, that's right. They play the game really, really well. They're very good at it.
The Democrats wouldn't, bless his heart, Chuck Schumer wouldn't know a soundbite if it hit him on the head. Are the Democrats they're so bad at making their case, and it drives me crazy. Are they so bad because they don't care, because they just are untalented? What is your read on that?
Okay, it goes back to professionalism. It's weird. So that once I come up with this hypothesis that this is who they are, and you start looking through the sociological literature about professionalism, it all fits. One of the things professionals love is consensus. Oh my God, consensus is like the second commandment after meritocracy. It's seek consensus. And the idea that in the technocracy, if you're like, if you have this technocratic worldview, the idea is that all us educated people know the answers. Politics is it's something that gets in the way. Okay, and this is so clearly reflected in Barack Obama. He talks to the Republicans and he's like, you guys know what I'm saying, and you know that I'm right, and now come on now, just sign on the dotted line. And he goes out there and he looks for grand bargains, and he tries to remember how he tried to get them to just get a couple votes for Obamacare, and they played him. you know, looking for consensus and, oh my God, and coming up with this, you know. It was
And they're
a
doing
Sex
it now,
Pistols
too.
reference there, but nobody got that. Okay. But Bill Clinton too, right? Always looking for that, always looking for consensus. And the Republicans just play them every time. Tom DeLay famously said about Clinton, I mean, I don't remember the exact verbatim quote, but basically, we knew Clinton was going to come to us. We just kept moving the goalposts. You know? It's like, well, you know, you could see it. That's who he is.
Well, the Republicans are Lucy with the football, and the Democrats are Charlie Brown trying to kick it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
You talked a couple of times about people having nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Okay, they're stuck with this party because, you know, I don't want to be to leave.
Right.
Being a Democrat means to go be a
Well,
Republican.
they're afraid. They're afraid of the Republicans. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So why is it that we as a people don't get behind changing the voting system to take away the spoiler scenario with ranked choice
Yes.
voting,
Yes.
with doing away with gerrymandering,
Yes.
with proportional representation, and allocating electors into the electoral college based on the popular vote within the state, so that it's not winner take
And
all
I'd
with
add something else.
51%.
I'd add something else to that list. Fusion voting. So populism. I'll try to make this brief because you guys want to see the game and we want to drink that bourbon. But my favorite political movement of them all was populism over in Kansas, and it ran out of control and took over the state. But the way they did it, they had this technique. They called it fusion voting. So they fused with the Democrats on certain candidates. And as soon as the populists were done, as soon as the volcano was exhausted, in every state where they had been powerful, they made that against the law. Okay? So the reason why this will never, I mean, there's no good reason for it. It's not, it doesn't defend democratic principles. It's not unconstitutional. The two parties just don't ever want that to happen again. And so they basically outlawed all these techniques that the third parties used to use, a bunch of the things that you mentioned. And yeah, we should have those things, but the problem with a monopoly is it's up to the monopoly to, to undo itself, and they don't want to. And that's this, incredible catch-22. It's deeply frustrating to me. But yeah, I would love to see viable third parties again. We had them all through the 19th century, but now, it never happens anymore.
I think there's a chance now, because of Trump, to get an interest in ranked choice voting in primaries.
It would be cool.
Because like in North Carolina,
I'd like to see it.
62% of Republicans voted against him.
Yeah.
You got every Republican delegate.
But they're not anything that's going to take away their position as a duopoly. They're not going to sign on to.
We got to do it at the state level.
Yeah. Yes.
A big fan.
Yeah, you're my kind of reader.
Okay.
Folks, look at that. 3 copies.
And that makes 4 signed copies before tonight. A big fan of yours. We want to encourage you to keep writing. In your opening remarks, you mentioned sort of Wall Street and the Federal Reserve System. So Thomas Frank, Michael Moore, William Greider, Bill McKibben, Deep Economy, 2009. Since I've got the audience's ear, McKibben, who I'd like you to, in your way, synthesize those 4 authors in the future.
What, right now?
Yeah, right now.
Jesus Christ.
And the message is that it's not just the 1%. It's, according to McKibben in 2009, the pacification of the meritocracy is that 85% of the wealth, not the income, is owned by 15% of the population.
Yeah, that's right.
So if they have their Mission Hills house and their new SUV.
I know a guy with one of those.
And their new SUV, that's the least deductible expense for a lawyer.
Yeah.
These people are all pacified.
Yeah.
And so this is, as a past member of Occupy, this focus on the 1% is incorrect. It's really the wealth inequality that's the issue.
Well, there's all sorts of different ways of looking at this.
And
yes.
thank you for mentioning
this is
Wall Street and the Federal Reserve.
I never shut up about it, frankly. You should see me when I'm at home.
Don't.
It's all we talk about in my family.
We need you.
Well, thank you. That is very kind. Yes, sir.
Yes, Dr. Frank. Bill Moyers, Chris Hedges, Ralph Nader, all exiled to journalism, Siberia, have told us our political elective system is totally broken.
Yeah.
And cannot be saved for the secretary, truck driver, meat cutter, social worker.
Yeah.
If Hillary is one of the totally compromised elite liberals that you write about, and Romney, Ryan, Rubio are mere stooges for
Yeah.
the investment small government bankers, what choice does the average Jamal, Josephina, Vu, or Theodore have but, as Hedges tells us, protest publicly, take to the streets,
Yeah.
and of course that would lead to arrest,
Yeah.
criminal record.
What choice? This is a great way to end. I have a good idea.
Well, Hedges tells me that's my only choice left.
Is to protest in the streets, but
And
look
be
at
totally screwed because I'll have to,
that's
I'll
not
have
going to work.
empty my bank account. I'll have to.
Yeah,
have a
look, it
criminal-
might work, but I know I've been in protests. I know when they work. It's like overwhelming. Okay, and what I mean is like when the people protesting outnumber the people in the town. So I describe an event in the book, the first strike I ever covered, that I ever wrote about. I didn't really know anything about organized labor, and there was a strike in Decatur, Illinois in the 90s, and I went down and learned about it. And I was there they had a rally, they had a parade, a rally, support from workers all over the Midwest, and there were 7,000 people in this town. This is not a big town. 7,000 people showed up, and I remember climbing up on a freeway overpass and looking back on this parade, and they filled the road side to side all the way to the horizon. I'd never seen anything like that. And at one point they're marching along, and there's a police car stopped in the middle of the road with its lights going and the doors open, and the policemen just were gone. They just they vamoosed, right? And it was weird. It was the power of the people that I was watching, it was like something out of the 1930s. I had never seen anything like this before. I've never seen anything like it since. And of course they lost eventually because of the way these things happen. They drag on for long periods. But I saw in that moment a startling, an amazing thing. I saw something right out of a Frank Capra movie, the unstoppable force of we the people. But that is rare, okay? I want to say, look, what Bernie is doing is showing us that there is hope in the two-party system. There's, maybe he won't get it this time, but 4 years from now, there's a lot of things to be hopeful about. And the one I want to close with is this. We can get this idea out there. The Kansas book, everybody knows about it now, right? What's the matter with Kansas? Everybody knows the idea now. This idea is powerful. Once this is out there, once people understand this, it can change things. I sincerely believe that. I believe in ideas. That's why I went and got that goddamned PhD. and thank you very much. All right. Hey, buddy.